All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lance Simpson. I'm the assessment librarian for the University of Alabama Libraries in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Our presentation today is creating, promoting, and assessing workshops for research data services. The other speakers that are going to be joining along with me today are Dr. Kevin Walker, who is the Director of Branch Library Services and Research Data Services, and Dr. Vincent Scalfani, who is our Chemistry and Informatics librarian. We have quite a lot to share with you all today, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. To get started, we're going to do a broad overview of defining research data services. We'll take a brief look at the history of the program at UA Libraries. We're going to talk about some of our work in assessment and promotion and what we're looking to do for the future. We'll talk about some technology considerations to have if you're looking to start a program like this from some experiences that we've had. We'll talk about lesson planning and developing some of these different services that we've had, along with our new RDS Informatics support group and an introduction to our scholarly API cookbook. We'll finish up then with future directions, what we'd hope to kind of see next steps for the program, and then we'll open it up for questions from you all. I will note we will be watching the chat as we go along, so if you do have questions, we'll be glad to kind of take a look at those as we are moving forward. And from there, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Kevin Walker to get us started in defining research data services.
Thanks, Lance. So I wanted to start with a brief overview and also with a definition for research data services, or RDS, which is just simply put the provision of support for data-intensive, technology-infused research. These activities generally focus on academic software, coding in a variety of languages, as well as the procurement, transformation, and analysis of data in all of its forms. In terms of personnel, our program has 3 librarians, including myself as director, whose job duties are specifically tied to RDS activities. My 2 colleagues include the Chemistry and Informatics librarian, Vincent Scalfani, who will speak here in a few moments. And we also have a newer addition to our team, Brittany Waltemate, who is our Research Data and Geographic Information Services librarian. In addition to our librarians, we currently employ 6 students who comprise our RDS Informatics group, which is led by Vincent. Importantly, this program also benefits from the efforts of several of our librarian colleagues who contribute most notably through instruction. In terms of services, this program focuses on providing UA students and faculty with research consultations, both by appointment and at the point of need, which is mostly delivered through our coding walk-in help service. We offer instructional sessions and workshops, and are also actively creating and maintaining a variety of asynchronous content in the form of research guides, Jupyter notebooks, GitHub repositories, and video tutorials. On top of this, at any given time, the core RDS group, and especially our informatics group, is also engaged in various special projects, which we'll touch on a little bit later in this talk. Next slide, please. And while today we're here to discuss some of our program's more recent developments, I felt like I should also mention the previous efforts that have helped pave the way for this. And we'll go back all the way to 2004 when UA Libraries opened the Sanford Media Center, which provided students with access to specialized AV equipment, as well as high-performance computers loaded with all of the latest software supporting audio and video production, as well as graphic design. And while this isn't really part of RDS, I think it was important to mention because that was our first sort of foray into supporting technology-enhanced research. And they did a lot of great work with their instructional program, which sort of paved the way for us. Around that same time, the open science movement was picking up steam, and over the next few years, we attempted to support these efforts through our promotion and provision of technical support for tools like Open Science Framework, ORCID, and DMP tool. And then 10 years later, we were opening the Alabama Digital Humanities Center, which pushed our library further into the realm of digital scholarship. And around that same time, we rolled out support for 3D printing and began experimenting with more formal academic technologies instruction. Unfortunately, that piece, the academic technologies piece, only lasted for, a year or two. And then the person that was doing that kind of left the libraries and moved on to our Center for Instructional Technology, where she was doing sort of the same thing. But we still continue to provide some one-offs in this area. But then we finally get to late 2015, early 2016, and that's when Vincent led us into providing our first coding workshops with MATLAB. Next slide, please. Here, I think it's important to mention that while UA Libraries has clearly been effective in looking forward to the evolution of research, these moves were not as well defined and complementary as that last slide might have suggested. But here, in around 2017, we set out to develop a more cohesive vision for the program. And in terms of what that means, well, first we needed to get everyone on the same page so that we could, for one, leverage our existing expertise within the libraries. And while we were offering a range of services in support of technology enhanced research, there was no shared vision or focus. So to help with that, next slide, please. We formed the RDS task force, which was charged with developing recommendations or plans for library services that support research, teaching, and learning relative to the acquisition, management, and analysis of data. And within this group, we were focused on both the refinement of those services that we were providing at that time, but also with the development of some new services. Next slide, please. Of course, it's one thing to write something like that, and another to actually implement those ideas. Luckily, we were not the first library venturing into these waters, so we set out to better understand the possibilities by looking at what others had already done. And this meant conducting an environmental scan of RDS at other academic research libraries. Additionally, we wanted to, once again, leverage that existing expertise wherever possible. So we conducted a skills audit across our task force members to help map out the various software techniques and workflows we could provide support for in the near term. And at that time, our group had 10 members. And I remember we came together in that first meeting, and I said something to the effect of, if we could each provide 2 to 3 workshops per semester, we would have an RDS instructional program comparable to other larger libraries. And that in and of itself would be a wonderful accomplishment. And so that's what we set out to do in the beginning, just this small goal of providing just a few workshops each. And here, I think it's important to mention that this was all still a side project of sorts for us. All of the librarians who were working to establish this program, including myself, were already quite busy with other job duties, and none of us actually had RDS in our jobs at that time. And while progress was a little bit slow going at first, our task force members all shared a genuine interest in pushing the initiative forward. And I think that's important to mention, because if you're looking to establish a program like this, you're not simply going to flip a switch and it's done. You will need supportive and interested colleagues who are willing to do a little extra work to make this happen. But again, even with dedicated colleagues, it will take a few years to build up your instructional capacity. And so while our librarians were engaged in doing just that, kind of working on building these sessions up, we thought it would be a good idea to see if we could bring in some guest speakers to help build up our instructional offerings. So we conducted a local environmental scan, which helped to identify 20 or so faculty members on campus who were engaged in the type of technology-driven research we wanted to build our program to support. Next slide, please. And fortunately for us, our colleagues in the academic departments were more than happy to work with us on the development of some workshops. And the general format was such that the guest speaker would provide some background on their research, as well as the technology they were using to gather or analyze their data. Then they would lead attendees in some hands-on training with a particular tool or software. And here I've provided a list of some of those sessions. And as you can see, some of these were fairly high-level topics, but we did our best to ensure that the hands-on portion of those sessions were beginner-friendly. So even if attendees didn't fully understand the research that was being described, they did get a chance to effectively familiarize themselves with the tech that was being used. Next slide, please. So going back to the visioning process, and specifically the development of additional capacity, as a team and based on the information we had gathered through our environmental scans, we understood that we all needed to expand the number of tools we could work with. So we developed in-house professional development opportunities where we could share our expertise with one another. Several of us were also seeking out external training opportunities through certificate programs and coding languages, Python and R in particular, as well as we were also seeking out additional experience through the development of our own research projects that utilize these tools. Here I will note that the most effective approach to learning these requisite skills needed to support an RDS program is through engaging in the real-world application of those skills, whether that's engaging in some sort of research project or developing detailed instructional content. You'll make much quicker progress if you tie your skills development to a specific problem-solving activity. And not only is this approach to learning important for our own development as librarians, but this also comes into play when designing instructional sessions for others, which Vin will discuss in a few minutes. For now, I will go ahead and turn things over to Lance, who's going to talk a bit more about our assessment and promotional efforts.
Thank you so much, Kevin. So thinking about those environmental scans, and when we first got started looking at what would be the next steps in developing a program like this, these were some of the questions that we had. So we looked at several different institutions to see how was their RDS program organized? What did their team look like? What expertise did they bring to the table in building these? What sort of activities or classes were they working in, and what sort of tools did they generally work with? In looking on campus, one of the big things that we did to do this sort of local scan was to go straight to one of our broader citation databases. So looking specifically through Scopus to see what faculty had used some of these tools that we had been finding. And that's where the list that Kevin pointed out earlier that we were able to generate. One of the big parts of kind of thinking about this and getting this sort of local group to be able to present was not just to be able to add to the skills that we already had or to be able to enhance that with skills that we might not have, but also to start looking at building buy-in within our communities. That's on the faculty level. Our faculty were really excited and they brought several people with us. It helped us to start thinking about what were ways that we could continue to build our service. So from that, Kevin also mentioned that we started to do an internal skills audit. So we have that posted now. And when we share the slide deck out, these are all linked. So if you'd like to go take a look, we would love to have you to kind of peruse these and see for yourself. We asked each of our librarians what software packages they would be willing to teach. And I want to differentiate that from what they felt comfortable to provide support for reference consultations. So we were able to get a list there that we could point our liaison areas and other groups on campus to. If folks had questions, they had a person they could reach out to be able to ask. One that I want to point out here, though, is what new software would folks like to learn? We really wanted to put an emphasis on it as we were growing this program. What were things that folks were passionate about? What was an area that they needed further support? Our administration was very supportive in getting additional training for us to be able to add these skill sets to our list that we were able to provide for our faculty and students that we're serving. And you can see here, there's an example of what it is that we have available, and two of our awesome colleagues, Elaine Walker, our scholarly communications librarian, and Brittany Waltomate, our research data services and geographic information systems librarian. So further, we wanted to look to see, we felt like it was important not just to decide what it was that everyone needed. We wanted to ask. So we developed a set of surveys to do a research data services needs evaluation. So we have at this point talked with both our College of Business and our STEM areas. And so starting in the fall of 2021, we were able to get kind of a nice set of information. There were several questions that we had. One was, what are the areas that folks are interested in us covering? Because that's going to decide, especially as we're thinking about adding new skills to our work set, where do we need, where is it that we need to add these? So from our colleagues in the College of Business and our students in the College of Business, we saw overwhelmingly that Python was a requested topic and something that we should have access to. We saw with our studio, the business-specific Wharton Research Data Services, Tableau, Qualtrics. These are all workshop setups that we have started to design and to implement so that we are meeting this need. We also asked folks about how it is they would like to receive these workshops. If you've been to a coding workshop before, a very programmatic intensive workshop, these can be kind of intense to get started with. So we asked both our faculty and students what their preference was. We saw from faculty that they preferred the live online setup, which is something that we did a lot of in the kind of like height of the pandemic, where folks were a little uncomfortable to be able to come to open sessions. We saw from our students so that they preferred a web-based video or an asynchronous content. We saw both had or the students had a secondary setup for live in person. This is something that we have started work on. It takes time. We're looking to make sure that we can put the best possible setup out there for our folks. So we have started to actually develop programs that are going to be specifically web-based, and we are still offering some live online and quite a few live in-person workshops to be able to kind of meet these requests for what it is that we're offering. We also asked our faculty here who would be interested in providing further workshops for us to continue to build that skill sets that we may not have represented within UA libraries. For this semester, we're currently surveying the College of Art and Sciences with the non-STEM areas represented. We've had a lot of interest from our colleagues in the English department and several other departments in looking at different ways that they can utilize research data services as a part of their research needs. So we're really excited to hear what the kind of final outcome with the responses that we've gotten from them. With our workshops, currently we are providing an assessment that focuses the most on looking at how folks have what was the efficacy of self-efficacy of the workshop for them? Do they feel comfortable using the tool once they leave? How was the format of the workshop? We have worked to create our workshop so that generally students or faculty or whoever it is that's attending are able to participate and work alongside with us. So we try to build these out to do that, but we wanted to see if that was actually the case or not. So we're kind of working to refine that with that setup. I will say though, this is a survey, a tool that we've been using that was geared specifically toward coding workshops. And as we broaden out a lot of the research data workflow tools that include some qualitative workflows like in vivo, looking at citation management, non-programmatic data visualization, we want to adjust this survey so that we are encompassing all of these workshops and being able to get good feedback. For the future, we're looking toward course integration, and we've had some success with that so far. My colleague Vin will talk a little more about that in the future, but we would like to take a look at it with that course integration, looking at some formative and summative assessments of the work that students are doing where we are integrated. We also have worked to promote our workshops specifically through our RDS listserv. And we've grown, we have quite a huge listserv now that we've gathered over the years. We've required registration through Zoom or LibCal, which has provided us access to email addresses. We try to make it easy for folks if they don't want to remain on the listserv, that they can quickly unsubscribe. We don't send tons of emails out each semester, but we try to give them a good landing place to be able to see all of our events. We have a great partnership now with the Office of Research and Economic Development, who provides a monthly newsletter that includes all of our workshops. And we have a calendar that again, this is going to be linked. You'll be able to see this in the slides once we send those out. That includes both a list format and a calendar format of the events that we're offering throughout the semester. And we've seen a lot of luck. This has been great to be able to embed in LibGuides, to be able to embed in course shells for courses that we have, and for being able to provide a stable link to quickly say, hey, check out the workshops that we're going to be offering for the semester. Looking to the future, one of the setups that we're going to be thinking about is what is the next step in being able to get promotion out there. So we've had a lot of luck with word of mouth. We have a great student team that has really sort of broadcast this out to friends and colleagues and brought a lot of folks in. We've worked with our PR group to create cardboard stand-ups, QR codes to be able to get access, but we're thinking about the next step and looking at what pieces have been the most effective in us being able to do that. the technology considerations. So kind of shifting from the assessment idea and thinking about how to actually put this into practice. There were quite a few that we had. And so in getting started, and especially as we shifted our workshops to completely online for a bit during the early part of the pandemic, we had a lot of questions. And one was, what is the easiest formats for our users to actually get started with the work that we're doing? If we're going to have folks participating along with us, how is it that we can make it easy for them or lower that barrier level so that they can get started with us? Thinking through, do we intend students to work through these activities with us? And for us, that's been a big part of our workshop setup. Will the classes be virtual or in person, which affects a lot of this? For our in-person students, we've been offering most of these workshops in our science and engineering library in the lab. So there's a couple of considerations we have there. Will the students bring their own computers, or will they be using lab computers? What software do we or them, or they need to be able to be sure that they have installed ahead of time? For our I would say for our online workshops, we were big fans of the Google Colab notebook or Google Collaboratory. The setup there is that, especially as we were teaching Python workshops, there was a nice way to use a computational notebook. So students didn't have to download anything. They were able to operate with programmatic calls within a sort of electronic notebook that allowed us to put both blocks of text and lines of code. That was a nice setup. We could send out a link. Folks could create a copy. They could keep that for future use. And then if they went in and changed things, they wanted a fresh copy, they could go back and grab that link. We now, in terms of specifically for our Python workshops, we have been trying to stick with using stuff that was directly installed on our machines, which runs into its own kind of challenges. But there's some value in folks seeing like how to get started in using this. We've specifically been using Microsoft Visual Code as a way to access different Jupyter notebooks or computational notebooks in working with Python. But it's been a learning curve for us to kind of look to see, okay, what do we need to have installed each time folks come in? What will folks have to install during the session? Because there are some packages that require that as we go along. But I think there's a lot of value, and my colleague Vin will be able to tell a little more about that as we go forward. We have, as said, used our PC lab computers for quite a bit. So we've got our Python workshops that we've been using. We are using Conda, which is a package manager for Python. I've got a link here again. You can check this out once we have the slides up. We're also using Visual Studio Code. We have taught some workshops with the Bash shell. And so that's a Linux-based setup, and we do not have Linux-based computers. So one of our workarounds was to have our library technology office to be able to create a server where we could register users to have access to a Linux system. So we're using SUSE Linux is the distribution that we've got. The only sort of disadvantage that we've run into that, they're accessing it through a SSH PuTTY, which I've got linked here as well. This is generally something that's installed on PCs, but what we've run into is we do have to have students to register well ahead of time in order for them to be able to use that, because we have to get them registered in our system to use that setup. All of our materials currently are hosted on GitHub, and Vin's going to talk a little more about that as well. Our Python workshops all have corresponding Jupyter notebooks or computational notebooks, so folks are able to take materials with them and have something to refer back to after the workshop. We're currently offering setup assistance before workshops now, and we are considering dual boot. This is something we're looking at for the future, thinking about as we use more Linux applications and want to teach more Linux applications, we're looking to possibly dual boot our lab computers in the science and engineering library to be able to make that a better possibility. The big setup that we are looking for next steps is evaluating asynchronous options. Now, in addition to providing videos, we'd like to look at other possible sort of learning management setups, any sort of content we can make it where folks are able to work through stuff ahead of time before coming to our workshops, or to be able to complement the workshops that we have out there. And all of this is linked out. If there's anything you're interested in checking out, I would highly recommend it. There's some really fun stuff that's out there and available. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Vincent, now to talk about the work that goes into planning these workshops. So taking this technology consideration that we've had, and what kind of the next steps is, where we've gone from there.
All right, great. Thanks, Lance. So just a quick note before I get started that I'm going to focus on workshops that Lance and I have been engaged with. Some of our other colleagues have also done workshops on R programming and in vivo and tools like that. So from 2016 to 2019, going back to a little history that Kevin was talking about, we really only had about 3 or 4 instruction sessions per year, and these were really responsive to class or orientation requests. And what we did was we fulfilled requests with software that we were familiar with. So at the time, we had some experience with MATLAB and Origin. Origin is a scientific plotting software, if you haven't heard of that. And so for MATLAB, generally a pretty basic lesson that just covered kind of the overview of the graphical interface, basic syntax, functions, variables, and loops, using very kind of basic printed handouts where students, kind of code and then students type it into MATLAB, and then they, get to see the code output and so forth. So very basic handouts. With Origin, this was a little more project or use case focused, where we actually took a data set of compound melting and boiling points and did a task with the students. So we created sort of a publication quality plot with them, and how you would go from, data set to plotting, multiple axes on the same plot and formatting things. And so that was definitely seemed a little more, anecdotally sort of engaging for me and for the audience to be able to kind of complete some type of task working with data. Next slide. All right, so around 2020, we really started to get serious about more proactive offerings with RDS related workshops. And so we were interested in supporting both commercial, so licensed software that the University of Alabama had, so things like MATLAB and Mathematica, those sorts of tools, and then also open source programming languages like Bash and Python. And so Lance and I taught several MATLAB, Bash, and Python workshops over Zoom and in person during this time. And this was as we were sort of just getting back from working from home during COVID. So we wanted to make sure they were accessible to students and faculty over Zoom and in person. So it was the same workshop, I think day 1 was Zoom, day 2 was in person. Since we liked the sort of project-based or use case kind of approach, we discovered the Software Carpentries, which is a nice collection of teaching materials, among other things, for teaching research computing. And so we were able to adapt some of the content from the Software Carpentries and kind of make it our own with our own data sets. We started a series of Python workshops. So this was the first time where, we had kind of a continuing series of workshops. And so with Python, for example, in the lower right-hand corner, we had a getting started workshop, which was more about, getting started with Python, what it can do for you, an introduction to Jupyter and computational notebooks, and then getting more advanced into things like functions, conditionals, looping through lists and dictionaries and things like that. And then kind of the more ending with a more advanced course on working with an actual data frames and plotting, some basic analysis. So one kind of important transition for us during this time was we moved from printed handouts to online markdown formatted documents, as well as computational notebooks shared on GitHub. And we've licensed them with a open source MIT license. And really the original intention was for kind of a quick sharing platform and for students to be able to go back and grab the slides or materials or notebooks. But it's certainly open to anyone if they want to reuse our content and adapt it as they need for teaching. Next slide. So here's an example MATLAB live script. So a live script is a type of computational notebook for MATLAB. It's pretty similar to a Jupyter notebook if you've used those before, or if you've heard of them, where you can have sort of text and code within the same notebook or within the same document, and you can execute the code directly within the notebook and view outputs. And so how this sort of works and how we approach this is we create a live script or a computational notebook, and it's got some text and explanation and code in it. And then we clear out the code outputs, and we distribute it to the class so that they can, work alongside of us as we're teaching and explaining the material. And there's sort of pros and cons to this. One, your students are typing less code, but we can definitely cover more if we're able to distribute a notebook so that we don't have to, wait for everybody to type, 5 or 10 lines of code each time. So it seems to work out well, kind of a mix of, students typing some code and then having some code available where they can just, click execute or run, and then we explain it. And so one important thing that I think Kevin touched on earlier was, working with, data sets and things that you might do in your own research or your own work. And so this particular example, we go through some of the introductory, syntax of MATLAB, basic looping and conditional statements, and then we apply that to a data set. In this case, it's a molecular compound data set from PubChem, where we can show users, how to, extract data from a data set, how to do some basic data analysis on it, and make some plots. In this case, there's a histogram here of the frequency of the molecular weight of these compounds. So that seems to work out well for us, kind of a balance of that introductory, variables and syntax type of teaching, and then combine that and apply it to some type of, use case data set. All right, next slide. Similarly with Bash or Shell, we sort of come up with the same approach. We've got, we go through a variety of basic utilities for working with text and data on the command line or in a terminal, things like head, tail, sort, unique, cut. These are command line tools that you can use to quickly work with data. You can merge files, you can extract data from different things. You can even do some simple computations and string matching and things like that. And so one of the use cases here that we're showing in the lower left is a data set from PubMed. So it's just a list of bibliographic information, and we show students how to string match or filter out lines of that text. For example, biology, if you have 10,000 of these in a file, how do you quickly use grep to just filter out the lines that match biology? So again, it works well for us to have some of that introductory kind of, this is what the command does, and then we try to use the data set that we're interested in to apply that within the lesson. All right, next slide. Here's an example Python Jupyter notebook. Similarly to MATLAB, what we do is we clear out the code. So we distribute the notebook either through Colab or on GitHub, and then we run it locally, clear out all the code outputs, and then we go through the notebook with students. And so this is using Pandas data frames and working with that PubChem data set to do some basic data analysis on the data set and create some visualizations and just kind of walk through, even concepts like, how do I import this data into a Python variable, and just walking through all of that with the students. All right, next slide. Okay, and then in late 2021, we started to build up a team of student assistants. We call them data informatics student assistants, to help support our research data services. Originally in fall 2021, we started with 3, and now we're currently at 6 students. And kind of four main areas that we're assisting with currently. So big focus on data set discovery and automated acquisition of data through Scholarly API. So API is application programming interface. And what I mean by a Scholarly API is some type of web service that the database may offer that allows us to search or collect data through scripting in place of the standard web interface. So you can write a little Python script and you can run your search and then actually download the data all through a script. Then we also do some walk-in coding help. I'll talk a little bit more about that. Student-led coding workshops. And then we also, our students are engaged with various internal library and external to the library data intensive projects, helping faculty and students create scripts for things like, merging data sets or extracting data from text or image files, creating visualizations and things like that. Next slide. Okay, so we created over the past year, what we've done is we put a lot of work into creating a scholarly API cookbook. And what this is a open source online education resource that contains code recipes for interacting with various scholarly APIs. So some of the APIs that we have on there are Scopus, World Bank, PubMed, PubChem, and some others. So kind of a range of business, scientific, and general abstract index type of resources. And so we have these tutorials also available in multiple programming languages. So students helped us write them in 4 different programming languages: Python, MATLAB, Shell, and Mathematica. And we're about halfway through creating the R tutorials. Those will be uploaded probably within the next month or two. And this has done a couple things for us. One, it's really been able to combine this idea of providing coding help and workshops with things that are directly related to libraries, searching databases, collecting data sets. So it's provided kind of that merging of these two areas. And then it's also allowed us to create a lot of content out of the cookbook. So as we're programming and figuring things out, it's like, oh, hey, that's an interesting method for creating or transforming a data set into a dictionary. And then we incorporate that into a workshop, as well as, kind of the broader things like teaching people how to interact with these scholarly APIs. Okay, next slide. All right, so originally I talked about in 2016, we were kind of doing a few workshops here and there based on request, and then we moved into a more sort of systematic approach with some Python series and some other Shell workshops and MATLAB. And then last fall, sort of moved into a mentoring role with the students to help lead student-led workshops. So last fall, we had a Python workshop series that we did along with one of our student groups, the Rocketry Club. And these were our data informatics students leading them. And then we also tried some Friday code demos. These were little 15-minute demos on plotting a data set in matplotlib, which is a Python package, or using the PubChem API. And so we did about 9 or 10 of those workshops in the fall. And then this semester, we've really scaled up the number of workshops with our students. We have a Python programming series. It's a 6-part series. We did a workshop earlier on creating a portfolio website on GitHub. We have a series on Raspberry Pi workshops. So Raspberry Pis are ARM-based Linux computers. And so we have some, intro to Linux workshops. We have some workshops where students actually worked to program external hardware. So, turning on and off lights and things like that with Python programming on Raspberry Pis. We did some network analysis workshops, which came out of some of our own internal projects, several workshops on scholarly APIs, and then as well as some workshops to support our 3D Studio area with SolidWorks and OpenSCAD. All right, next slide. All right, and then just to highlight a little bit more about the walk-in coding help. So this was a service we launched earlier this semester, so January 23rd, and we just had a sort of an idea that we have a lot of talented students, and we can provide some assistance with various coding projects. We didn't really put any boundaries on what kind of questions we would and would not help with, other than what programming languages can we currently support, and that the idea is to assist users and not do the coding for them with this service. So we have a little over 90 sessions that are staffed by our student workers this spring, and then already in just the 6 weeks we've had we've helped 35 students and faculty have attended these sessions. So it's been pretty successful for us, and we're excited about it. And we'll probably look at potentially even expanding this in the coming fall semester. And at this time, I think I'll turn it back over to Kevin to wrap things up.
Thanks, Vincent. So what we've covered thus far represents the culmination of work over the past few years. However, I thought we could close things out today with, briefly discussing where we're hoping to, go as we move forward with this program. And, first, we want to expand and refine our current instructional offerings. And here we can go back to our survey findings to help plan these moves. For example, our students want to see more instructional offerings for data visualization. And while this is something we've covered in a few of our Python workshops, we need to expand this in addition to refining the Python curriculum. We can also spin up some sessions for R. And we can develop tiered offerings, which we've done with a few of our Python sessions, but we could do it with other things like data visualization in Python 1, 2, and 3, and then we can also do the same thing with R. And we would also like to develop sessions around specific workflows in hot topics. For example, machine learning. While that's quite complex at some levels, it's well within the reach of intermediate users of Python and R. And with the now viral interest surrounding AI tools like ChatGPT, we expect sessions on machine learning to garner tremendous interest. And when it comes to showing value for the library, interest and more importantly, participation is sort of the name of the game. So with that in mind, we want to continue to assess our program, trimming content where interest is low and expanding it where interest is high. And here I will mention that sustainability is another important characteristic of a healthy RDS program. And we want to see steady instructional numbers over time. And that means sessions offered and attendees present. And of course, the best way to ensure stability in those type of instructional numbers is through course integration. So we're really interested in partnering with our colleagues in the academic departments to develop innovative assignments that incorporate data tools and analysis into the classroom, especially those classrooms that haven't traditionally been engaged in these type of activities. Because for those courses where this is sort of the norm, usually those instructors don't need our help quite as much because they are experts themselves. Along the same lines, though, we're planning to expand our RDS Informatics group and the wonderful work they're doing. In particular, we're looking to branch out into GIS and business analytics now that we have a few other people on board. We also think it'll be very important to strategically grow our asynchronous content, specifically our videos, because as much as we like doing in-person instruction, the fact is that most folks are interested in tackling this type of learning on their own schedule from their own computers at home. So we expect that by expanding this type of content, we're likely to see some healthy growth in use over time. Lastly, we're planning to add at least 2 students to build off of the success of that coding help walk-in service. If we're going to keep steady progress on those various special projects that we've mentioned, we can't let our project leads become overwhelmed with managing the high number of walk-ins that we're seeing, because those aren't, kind of simple directional type questions you might see at a desk or something. These folks are coming in and they need in-depth help with their coding. So you could be sitting there with a person for 30 minutes to an hour easily. So instead of just tying them up, we could hire 2 new students who can focus exclusively on the maintenance of that service, while our project leads will still help with that service, but they'll really spend more of their time focused on those special projects that we have going. And lastly, the sustainability of our program will be bolstered significantly through our strategic partnerships. For example, this past November, We had the UA Office of Research and Economic Development reach out to us to discuss upcoming changes to the data sharing policy with the National Institutes of Health, which rolled out in late January. I'm sure some of you probably know about that. And while it would have been easy enough to simply make sure our data management LibGuide was up to date, we instead used that contact as an opportunity to integrate RDS into the campus conversations surrounding research compliance. As we all know, research funding accounts for a substantial proportion of institutional funding these days. So we thought by tying our program to this vital revenue stream and this conversation surrounding it, we could establish the library's leadership in research data management. And here I'll also mention that this one contact has led to our colleague Brittany spinning up a significant amount of new content for our web-based research guides. And she's also offered at least 11 sessions over the past few weeks on data management and planning. And one of those was for all of the staff in our Office of Sponsored Programs. So we're really happy with these developments and the new relationships we're making with these other offices. In the same way, we've capitalized on questions coming from our faculty regarding research data storage. And in this case, we're working with our campus IT group to sort out how best to handle those types of requests. And while the IT group is really great at handling the hardware side of things, they aren't always positioned to kind of do the type of hand-holding you might need to do with some faculty that are just getting started with this. So we've taken it upon ourselves to position ourselves as a sort of an intermediary who can meet with these faculty members, give them some advice and kind of prepare them for their conversation with the IT group. And we think that's going pretty well. So, I think we're at a point now where libraries have an opportunity to sort of resubmit their expertise in information technologies. And if we don't do that, I think what we'll see is a lot of other offices popping up on our campuses, sort of trying to edge into those spaces. And that could potentially push us out of the way and render us maybe less consequential to our users. So I think we all need to be moving in these kinds of directions. And with that said, I'll go ahead and close this out so that we can answer some of your questions.
Okay, this is Jennifer Long, and I'm the moderator for this session. I just remind you, we'll have an evaluation survey, and we're going to put the link back in the chat box. There were some questions asked that were answered in chat, so we'll start with some of the ones that weren't answered. So the first question is, do you use LinkedIn Learning or something similar to supplement your offerings? And this was answered, but it only went to the hosts and panelists, so we'll do it verbally.
Yes, I think I had typed that in. No, I don't, and Lance, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think we've used any of the LinkedIn Learning or other sort of similar resources yet. But we have shared out resources, Python books and other coding books from places like No Starch Press and O'Reilly's. So we've used some of those books for kind of to teach ourselves, but and also to recommend as good resources.
Okay, the next question is, sounds like you're becoming quite dependent on student workers. What kind of recruitment and retention strategies are you thinking of for these, presumably in-demand employees?
Well, I mean, I'll jump in and say that we have gotten a lot of really great progress out of our student workers. And, the best thing we can do is pay them a very good wage. We pay these particular students on the same scale that the students who work in our IT areas, the rate that they're paid at. So that's about, 40% more, I think, than the average student worker on campus. So that's a one good way to kind of bring these students in. And another thing is, we're very fortunate. We've gotten plugged into the community of students who are really interested in doing this. These students are having a really good time. We didn't know we were going to branch out into all of these areas, but some of these students were so interested to do some of these things that, you know, we kind of are working with them. You know, this is also a teaching opportunity where we want them to get something out of this. So when they have an idea, we talk to them about, okay, this is how you pull together a short proposal to pitch an idea like this. They bring it back. We take a look at it, and we go from there. So we're trying to also provide them with some like real world job type experience where they get to know how to interact with one another, how to collaborate effectively. And so, I mean, maybe we've just been lucky up to now. I'm not really sure. Maybe Vincent can chime in on this one as well. But I feel like somehow we've gotten plugged into the right group of students, and they keep bringing their friends around. So it's really nice.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing to that, is that we do try and give the students, you know, flexibility to explore topics that they are interested in, which really helps. So of course, you know, libraries have some goals that we need to meet with RDS, but what we try to, you know, emphasize is that if you have interesting ideas, we can blend that in with our goals. So some of the workshops like network analysis and Raspberry Pis that came out of student interest that we were able to turn into workshops and things that met library goals as well.
Okay, the next question. At what point did your RDS task force turn into 3 dedicated librarians for RDS? How did you utilize your workshop/informatics progress to give evidence for needing RDS specific librarians?
So that happened over time. You know, I think around 2017, we hired our first data services librarian who was working under my position, which was really geared towards assessment at that time. And, you know, I think the key was building up the program, getting some workshops going, getting people coming in, get people interested, and just kind of keep evangelizing the importance of this service and showing value. And over time, our dean was really excited about this and worked with us. Vincent moved from basically a research and instruction type position within the science and engineering library to being the chemistry and informatics librarian. And then we had one of our librarians who started out as the data services librarian. They went home to China for a brief period right when the pandemic started, and they got stuck over there and they weren't able to get back. So that position was empty for about a year and a half. And during that time, I just sort of picked up those duties on the side. We kept the program going and built it up even more. And also with the help of the other individuals in the task force, we made the case like we need to rehire that position. And that's where we brought in this new one, which is sort of the old job plus a little bit more of a focus on GIS. And it just happened over the course of about 5 years. And you just, you know, keep trying to show as much value as you can and keep throwing out ideas that and engaging in projects that are sustainable and have a good, you know, a good outcome that your higher ups can point to and kind of brag on their people about. I didn't remember the other part of the question, but I don't think I had an answer for that one.
Okay, and we have time for one final question. Can you talk about any partnerships/relationships between RDS and the Center for DH you cited earlier?
Oh, digital humanities. Yeah, we actually just had a new person come in and take over the Alabama Digital Humanities Center, and she's been working hard to kind of spin up an instructional program or a workshop program that will, you know, it's involved some of us. I think Lance and Vincent both have taught some sessions over there. And we do have a close relationship with that librarian. We've worked with her for several years. So we do sort of collaborate on the big picture of RDS and making sure that all of our offerings are sort of complementary and not fighting one another necessarily, so that we can provide a little bit of something for everyone to have interest. But I expect we'll move more in the direction of offering some more text analysis type sessions at some point, because that's really seems to be more of the key in digital humanities, on top of the web-based nature and the graphics and video that are sometimes involved. So we're still building up that relationship, but it's going well so far.
I believe that's all the questions. I just want to thank everybody for attending the Tech Forum. We can stop the recording.